the microphone on? Is the mic working? It is.
And the students come.
Good morning, everyone. I know it's bright and early. People are still gathering breakfasts and they can come into the room, but I want to get started. We have a terrific panel, a large panel, an important topic, and so we are going to jump right in. I'm Elliot Gerson with the Aspen Institute, and I'm thrilled to have these five enormously distinguished and diverse people up here. We have presidents of colleges, we have scholars, we have business leader, and we have a policymaker. So I think we'll have an opportunity to talk from a number of perspectives about critical questions about higher education. Let me just briefly introduce our panel. Melody Barnes is the director of the Domestic Policy Council in the White House. As such, she is President Obama's Chief Domestic Policy Advisor and Coordinator on behalf of the White House. She was the President's top domestic policy advisor in his presidential campaign. Before that, she was counsel to Senator Edward Kennedy on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Claude Steele is Provost of Columbia University, where he's a professor of psychology. Formerly at Stanford, he was the director of the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, and also the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences. He's the author most recently of Whistling Vivaldi and Other Clues to How Stereotypes Affect Us. Sidney Harman is the executive chairman of Harman International, a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Science, a trustee of the Aspen Institute. He also holds a university-wide chair at the University of Southern California, where he is also developing a new academy named the Academy for Polymathic Study, which is appropriate for someone who is quintessential polymath. He's also the rumored buyer of Newsweek, but I won't ask him anything about that. Eduardo Padr is the president of Miami-Dade College. Some of you may not realize that Miami-Dade College is the largest institution of higher education in the United States. Time magazine called him one of the country's 10 best college presidents. He's the former chair of the Association of American Colleges and Universities and vice chair of the American College of Education. Kim Bottomley, for those of you who are up especially early, had a chance to hear her on this very stage this morning, is of course the president of Wellesley College. She was formerly the deputy provost at Yale, very distinguished immunobiologist. So she has experience both in a large research laboratory and large research university, as well now in a liberal arts college. And she also chairs the Consortium of Financing Higher Education, which is a topic obviously of enormous importance. To start, I'm going to take a moderator's license and just defer the critical question we're going to be addressing on purpose of higher education for a minute, because over the last 4 days, we've been in many, many panels about the crisis and the terrible problems in K through 12 education and the enormous gap in equity and opportunity that we have in this country, but also not just the tragic problems, but some of the exciting opportunities. I wonder, though, if there isn't a warning here, and we heard this also at the very first session of this first session of the Ideas Festival, when Neil Ferguson reminded the audience that we once led the world in K through 12 education. It's one of the things that really produced the country that we all that is so successful today. But we have fallen and further and further and further behind. He then said, in the 1920s and 30s, the greatest universities in the world were in Germany. It's commonly assumed that the greatest universities in the world today are in the United States. But he said, are we likely to continue being having the greatest universities in the world? The Chinese are investing enormously. Other countries are also investing tremendously and doing things quite differently. So before we turn to purpose, I'd just like to ask anyone on the panel who might like to comment about whether we are perhaps too complacent and whether there is a risk that something that now leads the world, arguably, could in fact follow a decline. And maybe we'll start with you, Kim.
So I think there are two things to say. One is that what's the strength of the American system really, I think, falls into sort of two categories. One is that it has to do with the research university model. During the Truman era, there was a really conscientious decision that federal funds that funded research would be given to universities that are educating the future scientists of the world, the people who will be the innovators. And that decision has really served America well. And that continues, and I think we're really in a very good position on that. The other thing that I think that we can be proud of as Americans is that liberal arts education actually is a very American thing. I mean, you can really kind of wave your flag on this. You know, people don't really like the word liberal and they don't really like the word arts, and when you put it together, it's hard for a college president to be convincing about what a great educational model this is. But on the other hand, it is a great educational model, and it's a model that other countries, China, Germany, other places, are coming to us to find out how we're doing. So I think that's what we do well. We have a lot of challenges in higher ed. I don't think I could stand up here and say higher ed is, you know, the best it could ever be. There are clearly some challenges I think that most of us would weigh in on. Affordability, how do we keep up to date? How do we have access? How do we educate the vast majority of our young people in the country? These are all major problems that are becoming bigger and bigger problems as we go forward.
Any other panelists, Eduardo?
Yes, I have to agree with that. The fact of the matter is that American higher ed is the envy of the world. And everybody's trying to learn from, you know, how we do it. However, we have our challenges. I feel that in this new knowledge economy, globalized society that we live in, the role that the universities, colleges and universities have played in this country, which has been vital and very important, has to be extended to more people. And I think that's the key, because we all realized that we need to provide the same opportunities to the majority of the people of this nation. If you look at the last century, the high school diploma was the benchmark. You got a high school diploma and you would be able to join the middle class. You would be able to get good jobs, buy a home, own a car, and put your children through school. Well, with a high school diploma today, all you can hope to do is flip burgers at a fast food store, get minimum wage, and stay in the cycle of poverty for the rest of your life. There was a recent study by Tony Carnaval of Georgetown University that demonstrates that from 1973 to 2008, the number of jobs requiring a post-secondary credential increased from 28% to almost 70%. And more, you're going to see that in order for you to have the best possibilities, you need to have a college education. How do we make that education, has been so wonderful, accessible to the masses, is the key to the future.
Melody?
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that sets the stage for the rationale behind the president's two big goals in education. With regard to higher education, it is to ensure that, once again, the United States has the greatest proportion of college graduates, and I stress graduates, in the world. We've slipped over the last generation. We know now that we are among our peers about 7th in terms of the number who are enrolled, and we're 15th among our peers in terms of the number of students who are graduating from college.
And we were first.
A while ago, absolutely. And I think, as President Padron was saying, at one point in time, a high school diploma was adequate. And it is no longer. 50% of the fastest growing jobs in the country are jobs that require a college degree. And we know, looking out over the future, that it not only will require a college degree, but those jobs will require graduate level degrees. So the competition is only becoming more and more stiff. So that goes to the president's first goal. And the second goal, and I think this goes back to your original question, the relationship between K through 12 and higher education. The second goal is a complete and competitive education from cradle to career. So the focus on K through 12 to make sure that our students are prepared for higher education, and they don't enter, whether it's community college, a 2-year institution, or a 4-year institution, needing so much remedial work that they are behind the game before they even get started, and to ensure that when they finish high school, that they are in fact ready for college or ready for some kind of certification program or ready for a career.
Thank you. Let's, I mean, it sounds though that what we've been hearing are the challenges relating to access, but we're going to spend much of the rest of our time talking about what actually takes place in American higher education. And the question posed in the title of this program is purpose. And most people believe, and many of our panels over the last few days have talked about how the world has fundamentally changed. More interconnected. Certainly the internet has had profound effects on education. You know, no longer do large libraries and knowledgeable people exist only in universities. They're ubiquitous. They're available through Google. What are the purposes of higher education, and have they changed in the 21st century? Is there a new mission statement for higher education? Claude?
I might be one that would stick to the conventional purposes of higher education. I do realize that at all times, one purpose, central purpose of higher education is to prepare people for their careers and for their contributions to the larger society. So that is central. But in my mind, there are really three things that are at the heart of what higher education does. One, I think, is at the level of the individual. And there, I think, it's almost, I'm a psychologist, so maybe I think this way, but we contribute to the development of the person in a very important way. There's a kind of a decentering of the person that happens when you go to college. You begin to realize that there are more points of view than the points of view that you've been exposed to. There are more kinds of experience than the kinds of experiences you had, and I think that is a fundamental part of education, and I think it happens most soundly at the level of higher education, and I think it's really a foundation you need to begin to take on the challenges of the 21st century and the digital age and the complexities of life as we go forward here. Another purpose, I think, is this role that Kim mentioned earlier of American higher institutions of higher education, especially being a part of a system of innovation. These institutions really are the bedrock of innovation in our society. They train people, they bring people close to the frontiers of knowledge. They create new knowledge and they disseminate new knowledge, and that is something that has made our institutions of higher education the kind of powerful things that they are in the world. I think this is where our distinction really comes from. And then I think thirdly, a purpose is that we need educated people to really have a democracy. This is a Jeffersonian notion, and that as that begins to fall, the quality of our democracy begins to fall, and the quality of our contributions in the world begin to fall. And so I think this too is a major responsibility for our system of higher education in the country.
Sidney?
I applaud everything I've heard. I agree, in particular with Claude's summary. I would like to emphasize an aspect of this material which, in my thinking, traces back to this illustrious place. It is some 35 years ago, here at the Aspen Institute, that a conference was held that drew to it the greatest talents, the principal thinkers of the day, people like Mortimer Adler and Lionel Trilling and the like. It was titled, "What an Educated Person Should Know." I think they had it wrong. And I think that for 35 years, higher education has been substantially devoted to what an educated person should know, and has paid far, far too little attention to how an educated person should learn how to think. That's no small difference. I come in part from the world of industry. Nowhere is it more dramatically expressed than there. This nation's love affair through its universities of higher education, its love affair with specialization. We are taught how to be splendid architects, how to be splendid physicists, how to be splendid mathematicians. But we are taught them in virtual isolation from everything else. In industry, I encounter time and again men and women who have risen through the ranks and hold positions of serious importance and who live lives of silent terror. They know how to do this one thing very well. They don't have a ghost of an idea about how the whole system works. And they're terrified that someday they're going to be challenged in a fashion that requires them to understand how the whole system works. Or somewhat worse, that the board of directors is going to learn that the only thing they know is this narrow thing. I argue, and we're hard at work at the University of Southern California, which has grown substantially in the last decade in terms of recognition for its educational verities. There's a serious effort there to take on this question, and that all too self-consciously titled Academy for Polymathic Studies is directed to that. Later, perhaps, I'll say more.
Thank you. Kim.
So I just want to follow up on that. I agree with you absolutely. I think what we want to do if we want students to stay in the educational system almost at every level is to inspire them, to make them want to be a part of the process. And so learning how to think is something they all get excited about. They don't get excited about having to memorize a lot of facts. So I think that's a very important part of education that we all try to do as part of our jobs in higher education. I think we succeeded that reasonably well. I would just like to go back to the question of what the purpose is and should it change in the 21st century, and really agree with Claude. I think what we do, the purpose as it stands, is really a very good purpose. I think we could broaden the purpose a bit, because after all, the students today, as they go through college, will have to enter a workforce, and as part of that workforce, they're going to have to understand different cultures, different religions, different values, in a way that we didn't have to do when we graduated from college. And so really what I think is going to be necessary is for us to start thinking about a pedagogical approach that would allow us to educate students for complexity. So right now the way it is in college, and it was for us, I'm sure, and for you, is it's about the individual. So it's about learning who you are and how you work socially. What's your philosophy of life? You compete to get into college, you compete to get the best grades in college, you compete for the awards, you compete to go to the graduate school. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. I think those things should continue, and they're good things to have. But in some place, the students need to understand that some of the problems that they're going to face out there are going to be problems that are going to require collaboration between people with different expertise. And that in order to do that, I think we have to set up a way in colleges and universities to have students be able to understand how to do that kind of work, so that they will understand that working in teams, working collaboratively, listening to other people's viewpoints, and synthesizing information to come to some sort of point of view is really something that is exciting for them, and also something that's going to be necessary for them once they go out in the workforce. We need to institutionalize that.
I totally agree with that. I think that we need to become, both teaching and learning needs to become more intentional. When you look at, especially in the predictable the first quarter of the 21st century, with such a volatile work environment, where Americans today change jobs 8 to 9 times during their productive life, very different from last century when you would go into a job, spend 30 years, and retire on that job. That's no longer the case. So making sure that students are engaged in their learning process, making sure that we give them the skills and the tools to navigate this new economy and this new society, it's crucial. And those are things that are enhancements that we desperately need in higher education today. in order to really equip our students to be successful in the new economy.
Claude.
Yeah, I would just want to follow on to that because I think intrinsic in higher education are the means of doing some of these things that scholarship itself is something that scholarship in science come to mind readily as experiences in my own life that showed me that I needed to learn a lot more and that my presuppositions about things were often not right and that you really needed to talk to other people and just the experience of finding that your own preconceptions are not always validated or are not always affirmed by people who've had different experiences or the act of scholarship itself. Just having that experience creates a kind of curiosity that I think is central to surviving in the kind of world that we're talking about, where you need to stay across the life course open to possibilities and to always consider yourself to be in a learning position. And I think that's one of the things that just the experience of scholarships, science. I also think the diversity of American higher education, the increasing diversity is another way that happens. You really come in direct contact with people who have different points of view. A globalized experience, which can be part of higher education. All of these things conspire to create this appetite.
But how practically, I mean, we all agree, we want, critical thinking is important, the learning environment, the, innovation and getting people to think in different ways. But as a college president, how do you do that? I mean, is it,
well, you do it in,
sprinkle magic dust, or do you require certain core, requirements, make sure they take foreign languages, the kinds of things we used to do when we were in college? How do you create that kind of environment and assure that over the 4 years your students are there, that they come out thinking critically and they're prepared for 8 or 9 different kinds of jobs in their life?
It's so important that we inspire students on some front. I think that that's really key. And with that comes a sense of confidence in their own ability, a desire to continue to learn. So how do you do it? So it's going to be different for different individuals. It's going to be different depending what the background of that individual is. So you do in some ways have to sprinkle that magic dust. You have to offer opportunities. Let me give you one example. So last year, and I give it to you because of the student response to this particular example. Last year at Wellesley College, we set up a new institute for global affairs, which we named after one of our famous alums, Madeleine Corbell Albright. And she was very much of a participant in this.
And she's one of our trustees.
That's right. So it's kind of nice talking about it here. It's a 3-week short course, and it's really about educating for complexity. Students were selected to be involved that were interested. Part of that, they had coursework and they have internships, but part of that is they had to do a research project. And at that particular point, it was on the UN Millennium Goals. And they had to work in teams. And so the first week of this, I asked them, how are you doing? And all of the students said, we love this. We're able to interact with students that are majoring in different things, that have different expertise. We've never been able to do that before. The second week, I asked them, well, how's it going? And one of the groups said, oh, it's going great. We're working on our project. And remember, the end of the project, the results of the team effort had to be presented to Madeleine Albright herself. So this was pretty intimidating for college students. So the students said, this is really hard to do, working in these teams and coming up with some sort of consensus about what we want to present. And I said, well, why is it hard? And they go, well, at Wellesley, you choose us and you say you want us all to be leaders, but we don't really know how to be followers. And that experience was really important for the students. And so when I talked to them after the institute was over and said, how was the experience? Absolutely, to 100% of them said this was the best experience they have ever had in college. So there's lots of things you can do like that, but I think capturing their imagination is really an important thing for a student.
Another kind of question there. We've also been hearing a lot about how we're falling behind the rest of the world, especially, and you've said this, in science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But Sidney, you, with an extraordinary career in technology as an innovator, are very fond of saying, if I want to get a manager, I want to find a poet. What do you mean by that? And is there some incongruity there? And the trends in majors in colleges, I don't know what it's like at Wellesley, but many colleges, some liberal arts colleges, actually have to put quotas on certain sort of pre-professional majors because people aren't majoring in English and history and philosophy and religion. They're majoring in things that are highly practical, highly focused, and maybe losing some of the focus on liberal arts. Sidney, I mean, you do say that. I've heard you say that. What do you mean?
I say it often. I mean it always. The arc of history is defined in large measure by a group of polymaths, people who mastered is an inadequate verb, who synthesized number of disciplines. You can trace it from Aristotle and Omar Khayyam through magnificent Leonardo and our own Jefferson and Franklin and Goethe and Einstein and Bucky Fuller. Every one of them eschewed this concentration on a single narrow discipline. Every one of them understood that each of these disciplines informed and illuminated, and to use a word I love, inspired the others. Innovation does not arise out of spontaneous combustion. Kids don't come to college hoping that, in fact, somebody will sprinkle this magic powder on them and whoom, I will invent the iPad. That material has to be germinated in rich soil. The purpose of the 21st century research university should be, if nothing else, to enrich that soil. And the way it seems to me, and I argue for this, and I have persuaded the provost and the president-elect at USC, that it's worth investing significantly in it, the way to do it is to celebrate, to recognize and celebrate the value in breaking out of this mold of specialization. Learn how to do this one thing very well, but let it be informed and illuminated and enhanced by an awareness of the others. The architect who understands anthropology is likely to design a house people want to live in. And I could go on at some length. The reason that I have said, get me some poets as managers, is that our poets are our original systems thinkers. They observe the complexity of the universe. They distill that complexity into a sublime expression. I cannot imagine a better definition for management than to be able to review the complex and distill it into something that is that sublime and interpretable. That's why I look for people, if you will, with the poetic mind.
Well, I hate to move from sublimity to sort of very practical considerations. And you talk about investments in higher education. Let's talk about the costs of higher education. As my wife is here, and we have 4 children in college at the moment. And so it's something I'm acutely aware of. Melody, affordability and access, what are the president's views about this? What are your views? And then I want to ask some other people about questions about affordability and why it is that higher education costs are going up far faster than inflation, far higher even than healthcare inflation. And this poses a huge problem. What can the government do about that?
Absolutely, and we see this as a problem that has solutions that have to come from multiple avenues. I mean, one of the things that we've done thus far, and it happened at the same time healthcare reform passed, so as everyone was celebrating that victory, it kind of came under the radar screen. But in the reconciliation bill, we also included higher education reform. And that was the culmination of a battle that's been fought for decades to reform the way that we fund and try to deal with higher education costs. It's been going on for many years. So one, by shifting from the current form of student aid to a direct lending system that allowed us to save about $68 billion. Some of that went into deficit reduction, but a big portion of that went into strengthening and enhancing the Pell system. And that's the way many low-income and middle-income students are able to go to college, and ensuring that the amount of aid that they receive goes from paying for about 30% of their college education to a greater proportion of their college education. And in some instances, if they're going to community colleges, ensuring that college is almost free for them. And also that we're going to be able to sustain that over a longer period of time. So increasing the award, strengthening the system. Also including what is known as income-based repayment. And that is a system that's already been in place that takes some of the debt load off of the shoulders of families and students. Right now, I think the average student loan burden for students is about $23,000. And if you're coming from a low income or middle income family and you're just starting out and you're already sitting and saddled with $23,000 worth of debt, that's a huge burden. What the IBR program does is, what we were able to do is expand that so that after about 10 years, or 20 years, depending on whether or not you go into public service, that debt loan is forgiven. And obviously, as I was saying, if you go into public service, that relief is granted a little bit earlier. And in addition to that, one of the things we touched on earlier was community colleges. Community colleges consist of the greatest proportion of our higher education system. Touches about 60% or more of American families. It's been an area where the federal government has had very limited footprint, but is incredibly important in providing access there, allows a number of students who want to start at a community college or see community college as a way to gain skills that they can take into the workplace or transfer to a four-year institution and perhaps do it more affordably. It provides a pathway for them. That we were able to do that back in March. To get a toehold in there. It isn't as large a footprint as we would have wanted, but at least it's a beginning. But that's only part of it. As I said, this is a two-part problem. The other part is the work that we want to do and engaging with university presidents, and many people have been doing innovative things around the country to drive down the cost, but we recognize we're talking about doing this at a time when state budgets are really, really tight, and the proportion of state dollars going to many colleges and universities is going down, therefore driving up tuition and fees. And that's creating a problem that families are looking at and they don't know how to deal with right now.
I want to come to Eduardo because you've been known for really remarkable success in taking students from low-income backgrounds, first generation, and giving them access to quality higher education. But before they do that, I want to put Kim on the spot and ask you, why, Wellesley's probably what, $50,000 a year, all considered roughly or more? Mm-hmm. Why?
So, good question. So first of all, yes, we are. That is the sticker price. Very few students pay that amount of money. We have a very rich and very generous financial aid program. So the average cost is closer to $30,000. And for students who come from families that make less than $60,000, they basically they're subsidized. And those students that come from families from $60,000 to $100,000 have quite a reduced tuition. So there is a kind of a recognition by Wellesley. It's really a long-standing history from our founder, who actually said he wanted as much calico as velvet at Wellesley, to really support students so we can have the best students anywhere. It didn't matter if those students could pay or not. So we think we do a good job of that. Nevertheless, I will say as a college president, I'll get out there and say it in front of all this audience, that we're too expensive, and that we need to look at why we're so expensive and why our expenses are being driven up. I think most of us that have large endowments and whose tuitions are fairly high on the surface of it, although most of us provide significant financial aid, are thinking about what we can do just in terms of helping with the President's initiative to try to make education more accessible to all individuals. I think it's really going to be a difficult picture because we can certainly look at our costs our operating budgets are pretty simple-minded. We have two sources of income for Wellesley's purpose. We have our endowment, and we have tuition. Other schools have research income, but that usually doesn't cover the costs of the research itself. So, it's all about where we spend our money. Most of it's on salaries, most of it's on faculty, and faculty are really critical to good education. So it's a complicated thing to figure out, and when you think about that. When you think about, we only educate the small liberal arts colleges probably, much less than 10% of the population of students. So the real question is, what's happening with the schools that are educating most of the students in terms of what their budgets look like? And for public schools, it's a problem. They don't have much of an endowment to help with their costs, and their states are not being able to provide money. They have only one other source of revenue.
California's higher education is one of the greatest public education systems in the world, and it's in crisis.
That's right, and the only source of money is tuition, and so the only place they can go is to raise tuition. So I think we're seeing a significant problem in this country for those institutions who are so important in educating the vast number of our students.
Well, in terms of large numbers, Eduardo, you really do a remarkable job. What are your views? Well, first of all, how is Miami-Dade as successful as it is with providing access, and then success, not just access, because another issue, Melanie, you've talked about too, it's one thing to be admitted to college, it's another thing to graduate.
Well, let me first comment on the issue of cost. In fact, for public institutions, that's a responsibility of the states. If you look at funding for universities and colleges in all states throughout the nation, in general, for the last 30 to 40 years, the amount of money invested into these institutions have been decreasing. So it's not because of the recession that we're going through. This issue of underfunding of education has been there for at least 30 years. Now, you take an institution like mine, where by state statute, the students are supposed to pay 25% of their education. Well, the fact of the matter that today they're paying 52% and the state is only providing 48%, has been decreasing every year. I'm working today with 15% less dollars per FTE than 3 years ago, in spite of a tremendous increase in enrollment. So yes, the issue of cost, and the key to our success is being affordable. That's a tremendous part of that, because we're an open door institution. We're taking those students that would not be admitted almost anywhere else, and we try to provide them with the same quality of education and opportunities as any other place. And I think the reason for our success is we're working with very vulnerable students who have bring a lot of issues which go beyond academic preparation. It is true, at my institution, we test every student who comes in, and 74% of them test deficient in at least one basic skill. So we have to invest and divert a lot of resources from the mainstream of academic life to be able to provide them with the kind of remediation that will prepare them. But they also come with some non-cognitive problems and issues. They are very fragile because most of the students, just to give you a short profile, 60% of my students are low income. 38% of those live in poverty. The majority of them are first generation college students. They have to come to school, most of them part-time, because they have to work and come to school. And besides coming, most of them unprepared for college. So those students are very fragile. And the only way that you can really be successful with them is instilling in them what you said. You need to inspire them. You need to make sure that they're able to come in touch with themselves. Most of them are very insecure. They lack self-confidence. And you have to instill in them a yes, you can type of attitude. They have to believe that they can do it. And that is something that is not inexpensive because you have to provide a lot of support. The key to our student success is setting high expectations and providing a very pervasive environment of support. And that is the thing that helps them not only have very good results in retention rates, but also graduation rates. And it's no easy task, but it's doable. And it's all related to resources.
I want to applaud that, and I want to add to it. USC is an enormous university. The profile of its students probably not all that different from your own. Many Asian students. I've had a unique franchise for the last 3 years. I lecture across the entire bandwidth of the university. So I do lecture at the schools of law and medicine and architecture and technology and business at the college, and the schools of journalism and communication. I am a smash at the School of Gerontology. Three years ago, I was introduced to a large audience of kids by an inspirational speaker, Pete Carroll, the famous football coach. And there he intoned that crowd, "Know who you are." And Pete Carroll in that moment came to mind as I listened to you. I was obliged to follow this guy. And I summoned the courage to say to them, with all respect to the great Pete Carroll, you won't have a clue to who you are until you begin to know what it is that you truly believe in. Now, that process of defining yourself and encouraging the self-definition by the students, I think, is fundamental to the entire learning schematic. You begin there, you've got a serious chance. If you enlarge on it by introducing them to the poetic glory of the interaction of all of these disciplines, then you've really got a hell of a chance. It is no accident that we live in a period of globalization and the rise of digital technology at the same moment. These are stamen and pistil. It's no accident at all. Each is an expression of the other. The kids, who in one respect are more literate and more numerate in the technology than are many of their teachers, set up another very special challenge. How, if that's true, do you make damn sure that they realize it's just not the mechanics, not just the machinery, not the instrumentation that counts. It's what you feed into that stuff that is crucial. You, I think, Kim, spoke, and by the way, I came here primarily to meet you so that I could put in a good word, not for his kids, but for my son-in-law, Bill Kane, who works for you. I'll stop.
Melody, and then I'm going to ask a question of Claude, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience, so please be thinking of some questions that you'd like to ask the panelists.
Sure. I think the issues that we've been talking about, access, persistence, and completion. And we've seen such a hunger for innovation and a drilling down on the work in that area. I was talking about the higher education work that we were able to do in the context of the reconciliation bill framed under the American Graduation Initiative. A piece of that included an access and completion fund that we weren't able to get done there, but we're still pushing on. But as we've gone around the country and talked to college presidents, talked to people in states, et cetera, there's a real desire to focus on these issues so that we get kids in and out of college. And some of the things that we know we need, one, better data so that we're tracking and better understanding what's happening to our students when they enter, what's happening either at the point at which they drop out, aren't able to complete, or why they are able to complete. And also to try and catalyze some of the innovation and scale it up, and what we're seeing around the country. For example, in Ohio, we recognize as they are putting state dollars into public education, that they are not only looking at enrollment rates, but they're looking at completion rates to determine where public dollars are going to go. So they're starting to look at that. Again, data is very, very important to that. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. I also wanted to say, I think throughout the conversation that we've been having, and I don't want to drag this back to the K through 12, but they're so hand in glove that it's never too late. It's always important to try and inspire, to focus on those higher order analytic skills, to drive students who are interested in STEM studies in those areas. But if we're starting that when someone walks on a campus and they're 18 or 19 years old, I think we've missed an opportunity that we have to start much, much, much earlier. And that's some of the work that we're trying to do in the K through 12 context, so that students have the opportunity to move beyond the fill in the bubble and think about and think through problems, analyze problems, and to strengthen that set of skills as they are also moving through their K through 12 education.
Claude, I can't resist. We have really the leading scholar in the country who studies how stereotypes affect self-image and ambition. And the work that you have done particularly, and how it's affected African Americans and their disproportionate access to and success in academic fields, also women, and as we discussed earlier this morning, their disproportionate lack of access, success, self-image in quantitative fields. What, if anything, can universities do to address these huge stereotype gaps and their pernicious effects on young people's ambitions? Or what can society do? What do we do about this problem that you have done so much to study and research and write about?
Well, I think one thing to do is to recognize that we still have the problem, even though most of us, including myself, are reluctant to see that. I think just stepping back from that picture, we have to recognize we're still a society that is trying to integrate a very diverse population into our institutions of higher education, and that has inherent in it certain kinds of challenges. Our history visits us in the classroom, and the way it visits us is in the form of stereotypes. And here I'm not so much talking about people using stereotypes actually in the perception of people. I'm talking about people worrying that they could be stereotyped, and the effect that can have on the choices people make, on the level of performances that they're able to give. I'll give you a simple example. You give African American and white college students a difficult IQ test, alone in a room. And the test gets more and more difficult as it goes on. It's made up of nonverbal items. What happens if you do that? You get African American students scoring considerably lower than white students. If you tell them it's an IQ test, they score considerably lower than white students. Why? Part of the reason that after all of these years of research, I think we're pretty confident in pointing to, is the fact that when you're, as an African American now, you're in a situation where the stereotypes about your group are that you are lacking in this area. And here this test is precisely about that area. So as you experience frustration on it, you can begin to worry that you're confirming that stereotype, or that you're going to be seen to confirm it, or that you'll be judged or treated in terms of it. And that anxiety and wrestling with it and trying to overcome it is a multitasking kind of an effort, where you're doing two things at once, trying to take the test and resist this perception. So this is really a moment where history is actually there with you. And
so are the test results different if they're told that it is a different kind of test from an intelligence test?
If you tell them that the same test is a puzzle and has no ability to measure your intellectual abilities, then their performance matches that of white students in that situation.
It's remarkable.
So that's a way you can get at the role that this still plays in higher education, I think throughout education. What do you do about this? I think there are some common sense things. I think some schools and some individual professors and instructors are intuitively know what to do. One thing is to be demanding and but at the same time affirming of students' abilities to meet those demands. That is a combination of strategies or tactics that signals to the student that they're not being seen stereotypically, that they can meet these very high standards. And that combination of things probably is what Eduardo has inherently sewn into the culture of his institution, that it's a place where a lot is expected because there's a lot of potential there. That kind of context and culture can make a great deal of difference. I could go on with a long list of those, but you'll have to read the book.
Whistling Vivaldi.
Whistling Vivaldi. Not that I'm putting in a plug or anything.
All right. Questions from the audience. In the back, is that Howard? And wait for a microphone again, because this is all going to be videotaped on the web.
Thanks. Howard Gardner. Claude, you made the important point that a purpose of college and universities is to have educated citizens for democracy. Now, I don't know what the situation was like when Jefferson said that, but many people, including me, think our democracy is not in very good shape now. We have a political leadership that is polarized and to some extent paralyzed. And as far as ordinary citizens, Justice O'Connor told us about both the amount of ignorance in our citizenry and the degree of siloed sectors. So my question is, there are lots of things which colleges and universities need to do. Should colleges and universities be doing more focused precisely on citizenship for democracy? And if so, what might your institutions do?
Important question.
That question is so good, I'm not sure how to, any answer can completely match it. But I do think, and this is one reason I chose the rather unusual term at the beginning when I was talking about purpose of decentering. Because I think part of what goes wrong in our citizenry is people having a sort of absolute conviction that what they know is right and right for everybody, and that there's no broader set of views. And this is something that I think gets overcome by higher education, that people begin to see multiple perspectives, and we want to get to the point where we understand that our democracy is in part strong because it draws on a diversity of points of view. It's always been that way. That's always been a strength in the society, and that's something I think higher education can foster. But I think we could be much more explicit about that in our curriculum and our general education requirements and the like.
Elliot, I just want to add, I'm fearful of teaching things. I'm fearful of teaching leadership. I'm fearful of teaching democracy. I think the responsibility for educators is to set the environment in which that material is nourished. And there is no environment less conducive to thinking and acting democratically than an environment that honors specialization. Almost by definition, it separates you from everybody else. And so I believe that an educational environment that encourages interactive learning and an embracing of multiple disciplines is a very good step toward democratic thinking.
But what about, just to continue that, it seems like many colleges are moving in the other direction in terms of sort of a broad classical education and exposure to different ideas, different traditions. Should we be doing more to assure that students are exposed in their undergraduate years to a broad array of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Not because it makes you somehow more respectable, more cultivated, but because it enlarges. It always works to enlarge the capacity of the student to think anew. T.S. Eliot, some decades ago, almost sadly asked, where is the wisdom lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge lost in information? I think our target ought to be not so much information, not so much knowledge, as wisdom.
Question. Jane, in the front row.
There's a congresswoman sitting up here who normally doesn't need a microphone.
Except you can't ask a question of your husband.
I wasn't planning to. Melody, I was proud to vote for the education package as part of historic healthcare reform, but I think only 5 people on the planet know that it was there, and I just urge you to get the word out. My question is to others than Sidney. On the panel. I am a graduate of Smith College, which, like Wellesley, is still a women's college. In my day, several centuries ago, it was one of the 7 sister colleges, and that's changed. But here's the question. With respect to generating the next polymaths, does gender-separated education help or hurt? I mean, I was listening to Sidney's list of polymaths, and I didn't hear a woman's name on it. I think our goal ought to be to have women who can match, and we should be able to do that since we're certainly equally as smart as men, match the virtuosity of some of the men in history and perhaps some of the men presently.
He was simply afraid of flattering and embarrassing you, or he would have mentioned you in the list. But Kim, do you want to answer?
I agree with you absolutely. I mean, of course I believe in women's education, and I think Wellesley, Smith, Mount Holyoke, Vassar, in the days when they were single-sex, Barnard have been enormously successful. And then we can really, in many ways, measure our success by what our graduates go on to do. I think there's still a very important role for single-sex education. I think we only educate about 2% of the students. So I think as we think of what we do that works really well for women, I think the question is going to be, can we export that to other institutions of higher education in a way that will help women in those other educational venues? So I just want to say to you that if you look at a piece of data, being a scientist, I like data, and I like to talk about science, so I'll give you just one of those. So if you look at what colleges and universities produce the most women graduating in the sciences that go on to get their PhDs, all right? So that's talking about universities and colleges. You look at the top 50, almost all of them are universities because they're a lot larger, but there's still 3 liberal arts colleges on that list, and that's quite amazing given how much smaller they are. And 2 of those colleges are women's colleges. So, and if you can cut the data a whole lot of other ways, what you can find is that liberal arts education in general, and women's college education specifically, really does things that advantages women in ways that are hard to sort of quantitate. So we invest in women, we invest in women's education, and I think, again, if we can figure out what that is that works, exporting that is a good thing.
Actually, maybe we should be thinking about investing in men. I mean, many colleges today have affirmative action programs just to make sure that men are even close to the number of women in the colleges. Another question. Yes, in the back, right here.
I was wondering if you think everyone...
Microphone.
Should everyone go to college, or are there other forms of higher education that would better serve certain of our population?
So,
Well, I imagine that everybody here went to college, but my favorite of all favorites, a great polymath, was Margaret Mead, who used to observe that she was raised by her grandmother, who wanted me to be an educated person. And so, of course, she kept me out of school.
So what about vocational education? What is the role? Let me ask you, Melody, in response to that question.
That's one of the reasons when we articulate the goal, we say cradle to career and not just cradle to college. Many students, 4-year institutions, 2-year institutions, or some other form of certification, some form of education beyond high school is what we are stressing and what we think is critically important. But that varies depending on the student, the individual, and what they are trying to accomplish. We just want to make sure that they are ready for that next experience and that they have access to it and that they can move through that experience and actually complete it. You know, one of the things I also think is interesting, I just got here last night, and one of the, I was getting information about some of the panels that had taken place, and a really lively conversation I understand that Walter Isaacson had, and with entrepreneurs. People have gone on to become incredibly successful and starting out their stories with, well, first I dropped out of college. Then I dropped out of college too. And I don't have the answer to this question.
Those were the 2 founders of Twitter.
Right. So what does that mean for us? Is it something that we're not providing in our higher education system for them? Do we need to reorder it toward what it was that they were seeking? Should we just toss our hands up and say college wasn't right for them or necessary for them? I think that just raises some interesting questions about their experience in our higher education system.
You know, one other aspect of that, again, thinking about the other panels we've been to so many panels that have talked about assessment and assessment of the quality of teaching. as I said, my wife and I, we have 4 children in college. I have no idea what kind of education they're really getting, or whether it's worth the money, or why don't we talk seriously?
You don't want to tell yourself that.
No, yeah. But Eduardo, I think you actually have some kind of an evaluation system. I
Yes,
mean,
what I like to answer to the lady's question, because when you consider the fact that in the present economy and more so in the future, the majority of the jobs require post-secondary education. According to the Department of Labor, more than 80% of all the new jobs being created in the US today require post-secondary education. So the question is not where everyone should go to college. The question is where every citizen of the United States of America should have the opportunity to go to college, because that's a real key to a middle class status. And I think every American should have that opportunity. Now, in terms of assessment, yes, I think it's important for us to be able to know the kind of learning that we are having. And what we have done at the college is to, first of all, work very closely with our alumni, with business leaders. We ask the simple question to business leaders: what are the skills that our graduates should have in order to be successful in your corporation, in your company? We went to alumni and I said, did the education that you get here was enough? What was lacking? What would you change? And we went to our faculty and involved them in that same discussion. As a result of that, a very, very great discussion, we were able to come up with the learning outcomes that were to be expected of every graduate of the institution. After that, that was the easy part. The difficult part was, how do you assess learning? And how do you know that, in fact, those skills and that education is being obtained? And to the credit of our faculty, I would say that that process was a very grassroots process, where the faculty was able to identify authentic assessment mechanisms to determine the kind of learning that is taking place and use that to improve learning. And as a result, what we have today is that teaching and learning at my institution is more intentional, our programs are more robust, and the students and faculty are more engaged in the learning process. And I think that's the key to a good education.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions. Over here. Can you just wait a second?
Yep.
Matt's bringing the microphone.
Jay Winston, it occurs to me that the role that Sidney is playing as he lectures in departments across the college is the role of mentor. And he's, in a sense, serving as a role model for the importance of both depth and breadth. And I guess my question is, how do we create incentives to bring larger numbers of Sidney Harmans as mentors to college campuses? And then, in turn, create incentives to link college students to younger people, to help provide for them a roadmap on what's just over the horizon, to help strengthen commitment to stay in school.
Very interesting question. Perhaps one of the either provost or college presidents.
That's go ahead, you start.
Well, I'm not sure I know exactly how to do that, but I will affirm how important it is. That I think one of the sort of magic dust you were talking about sprinkling on people and causing inspiration is accomplished by role models. They do both. They give you an existence proof that someone like you can do this. That's very powerful and motivating. And they show you how to do it. And so I think in higher education we have underutilized that mode of education. And I do think we have to get more imaginative about how to do it. That's as far as I can go at the level of specifics, but I think the value is a really important one.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, please.
I think that's really important, and I agree that it's very hard to figure out how to organize that. I know at Wellesley, our alumni body is very active in interacting with our students, and I think this is true for all of the women's colleges. So that's one place you can go to really have those great role models that are out there kind of helping students negotiate their life. In terms of the students, I just want to put a plug in for the students. I think the students today are the most inspiring students I've ever seen. They are so interested in social justice. They are interested in going out there and helping the world. They are terrific, and I'm sure this is true for your institutions as well, but their willingness to go out to the community and work in the community, to participate in Teach for America is really amazing. So I think that part is really working well.
A 20-second intervention. I make it my business to lecture across not only the bandwidth of the university, but at all the levels, and especially at the incoming classes. And I am utterly astonished at the difference in the quality of the student body in the incoming freshman year, this year, from any I have seen before. Utterly amazing.
Yes, right here.
I'd actually like to speak to the issue of role models that was brought up, because in my life, they've been incredibly important.
Microphone, please.
Is this not working?
Yeah, just speak a little louder.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm a person that never went to college, and because of several role models, when I was a legal secretary, one who was a judge who was speaking at the conference this week, and another attorney, I decided to go to law school, which I did without going to college, and have had an unbelievable and interesting career and met many wonderful people as a result. But in terms of how our school, I'm a trustee of Pitzer College, which is one of the Claremont colleges, which is pretty funny since I never went to college myself. In terms of one of the programs that we have that I would recommend to anyone, depending on the area where you're located, we are located in an area that has a very low income population. And many of them are Latinos. And so instead of having our kids go off to Spain or Mexico to learn Spanish, we actually have people from the college go to the homes and ask them as a favor if they would work with our students and teach them Spanish and allow them to have dinner with them, and we pay them to do that. So number one, they have a job. Number two, they're honored to be part of the college. And number three, many of their children are now going to our school.
That's a wonderful, wonderful idea. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have to close now because we have next sessions that you need to get to, but I'd like again to thank this amazing panel for us.